not the unbelievers. Those who believed were together, and they had all things in common. And so they sold what they had, and they divided and said, hey, what do you need? Your kid needs a new pair of shoes. Okay, we'll get that. And if they had them, they'd get them. If not, they'd sell them. They would do whatever they had to make sure that the new believers who were right there, all of their needs were taken care of. This fellowship helped them take care of one another. Why? Because they genuinely loved them and cared for them. That's why. That's what this fellowship does. You genuinely love, you genuinely care for them. You want things to go well. You want to take care of them. You know, I had this one story, and I love it. We were in Cuba, and I love talking about going to Cuba. I hope I get to go back there again. We went out, and they would gather us, and we'd go in teams. We'd go door to door, and they were putting together several teams. I remember the first time we were there, I saw this guy across the other room. He was in the back corner, and I was over here. And I saw him talking to some people, and I had my eye over there trying to talk to them. And they were trying to put me in this group, and I was like, no. I said, I'm going with that guy over there. And that's what I was saying. I didn't even know who he was, but I just said, I'm going with him. And then he was over in the corner pointing my way, and he said, no, I'm on him. That hombre over there. So he was over there saying, I'm going on his team, and I was over there saying, I'm going on his team. He was an evangelist, I'm an evangelist, and we didn't know that, but that Spirit brought us together, and we led a lot of people to Christ. One day, 17 people, we stopped at 17 houses, and 17 people at least got saved. It's incredible that we would go and share the gospel and work together, and while we were walking around the first day, this is what happened. We were going, and we sat down. There was this corner. We took a break, and we sat down. There's this big rock, and Pedro sat on the rock. And he takes off his shoe, and I hadn't noticed his shoes before. He takes off the shoe, and there's a hole in the bottom. I mean, you can shove your thumb through the hole. It was a big hole. And he takes a cardboard out, and he folds it one more time, and he puts it back in. And he says something to my interpreter. He says, Pastor, would you please pray that I can have another pair of shoes so I can tell more people about Jesus? That was heart-wrenching, right? And so I said, well, what size does he wear? And he asked me, he says, 44. I was like, 44? Shaquille O'Neal didn't wear a 44. What the heck? You know, at the time I didn't realize they don't go by the U.S. size. They go by the UK size. I have no idea what do you have any idea what a UK shoe size looks like? Well, apparently 10 and a half is 44. You see, what happened was before we left, I went and got a pair of these waterproof boots that were really cool. And I took them with me. And for whatever reason, I grabbed them that day, and I had them in my other bag back at the church. We went back to the church, and I was like, oh, that's right. And I went to go look for something, and I forgot the shoes were in there. And I got the shoes out, and I said, I opened them, I looked at the tag. Guess what? They were size 44 in UK size. So I went out, and I held them. I said, Pedro, moi? I said, yeah, you. And he gave me this big old hug and lifted me up off the ground, put me back down. And it was really cool. So he got these new shoes. He asked for shoes, and another believer had shoes, and guess what? I'd even charge him for them. No. I was so glad to give them to him, and he was so glad to get them because the fellowship we had. That was the first trip to Cuba. The second time we go back, I saw Pedro, and he's like, and let me tell you something, buddy, they look just as new as the day I gave them to him. He took care of those things. It was awesome. And he was very thankful. Why? Because you meet one another's needs. You get to help each other. And the person giving is as happy as the person getting. And that's what the fellowship in a believer is. You make sure other people have their needs met. And from time to time, we get to have that privilege where we get to share with people and give them what they need and help out. And it's awesome. Now my iPad's going to go crazy for a minute because I was talking too long and the printer's out, so I got my printer on the iPad, but you have to give me the next passage, please, up on the screen. So continuing daily with one accord in the temple, breaking bread from house to house, it says what they did. They ate their food with gladness and simplicity of heart. That was the fellowship they had. They realized that everything that money can buy is not all that. But what really was important was the fellowship they had. Now, they continued daily with one another in the temple and then house to house. So they went to church, and they went from house to house, and they fellowshiped. They had kind words with one another. They ate their food with gladness. They were glad to share it. It was just simplicity of heart. It's just a simple way to live, and they're glad to do it because nothing else mattered other than Jesus Christ in their life at that time. And that made all the difference in the world. Next verse, please. Praising God and having favor with all the people, the Lord added to the church daily those who are being saved. So here's where we go. First of all, it starts with the gospel. The fellowship starts with the gospel. You can't have fellowship with other believers until you have fellowship with God. That's where it starts, a gospel message where we can have fellowship with God, and then we join in fellowship with other people who have that fellowship with God, and that's our relational, our horizontal fellowship. And it goes this way. And if you have the gospel, it starts with the gospel, you have the fellowship, the Spirit of God bringing it, what's the result? There's growth. That's what happens. They were adding to the church daily those who are being saved. Because the people who received Jesus Christ, who had this new life, told other people this good news, and other people believed it, and they saw what they had and they wanted it. And I don't know if you ever had that happen to you where you're working with someone and maybe they just say, there's something different about you. What is it? And you get the chance to say, well, it's Jesus Christ. The difference in me is my relationship with God. And some people see that, and some people will want that. And you get a chance to share it with them. And if they really are open to the gospel and you get to share the gospel, and I'm so proud of Haley, she's taken the gospel and shared it. Never shared it with anyone before, led 2 people to Christ her first time alone, ever doing that. That's 2 more people in the kingdom. And I had a chance to share the gospel several times with people yesterday, and we hope that they accepted Christ. And the little kids, they open up, and it was precious. It was awesome to be able to do the bracelet, tell the story, and having them come into the kingdom. And there were 5 yesterday accepted Christ. I don't know how many will accept Christ today. It's a funny thing that if you look for lost people, you can find them. They're everywhere. I remember this one pastor, we'll close with this. There's a pastor. He was on Moody Bible conference. They have this Moody Bible conference. I remember he was on the radio. And the pastor came in, and he started with this really, really small church, and the church exploded. And he said, Pastor, you had a church, you had like what? They had a handful of people, like maybe 13, 15 people. It says, now you have over 700 people in your church. Says, that's right. And you can tell he was a simple man and wasn't really that educated. He could just tell he just loved Jesus, and he said, so you took a little church, that's right, and now it's over 700 people. I was, yep. So what'd you do? He said, well, we just started looking for lost people. There's everywhere. He said, well, how did you find them? He said, I wanted to find out. I just wanted a way that we could go out and reach our community with the gospel. So we just started printing up buttons and hats and T-shirts. Said, really? What'd you say on them? Ask me. That's it? Just ask me? That's it? And what happened? Well, every time they asked us, we told them about Jesus. So, and over 700 people heard the gospel and came to know Christ. And it was really funny because Joseph Stoll, he was there, and he just said, wow. He was given an interview, and he says, it's amazing how many of the elect you can find if you're looking for them. If we're looking for people to share the gospel with, if this fellowship with God really means something to you, and if you love your neighbors yourself, you're going to want the people around you to have that same thing. You know, that maybe that's why he says, I want you to love me with all your heart, your mind, your soul, and strength. I want you to love your neighbor as yourself. Because if we really love God to that degree and we are happy with what we have, how can we not share Christ with our neighbor if we love our neighbor as ourselves? I don't know if you saw that one clip. I've showed it to our evangelism class. When you had Penn and Teller, remember those illusionists? Well, pin was touched. See, I did this show. I did it 2 nights, and there's a guy that came, and he was part of the first act. He was one of the people, and they stage people. Believe it, I hate to blow it for you, but they have certain people in the audience that they have participate in the show with them. He was one of them. He had one of the props, and they called him up, and he came back the next night. And he was in a hallway waiting to talk to him. And he waited. He said the guy was patient. He waited. Everyone else that was there, they came, and he just sat by the back, and he waited until everyone else was done. Then he came and approached me. He said, and he gave me this little book. He said, it's like a New Testament and Psalms and Proverbs. That's a New Testament, right? And he didn't know anything about it. He's an atheist. If you don't know, he's an atheist. And he says it in the video. He says, and you know what? I'm not a believer. I don't believe there is a God. But this man was so kind. He's a good man. And he just wanted me to have this book, and he gave it to me. And here's an atheist. Here's what he says. He's going through it, and he says, if he really believes this, and he did, he said, if I really believe that, I would tell everyone I knew. And then he makes a statement. How much do you have to hate somebody not to tell them that, if you believe it? How much do you have to hate someone? If you believe that they're going to die and go to hell if they don't receive Jesus Christ, how much do you have to hate them not to tell them that? Folks, this is an atheist saying this. How much do you have to hate somebody not to share the gospel with them? If it did anything for you, and you're supposed to love your neighbors yourself, don't you think we ought to expand the fellowship here and in heaven and enlarge the kingdom? It starts with the gospel. It starts with the Spirit of God coming in our hearts. And we share the gospel with other people. And we build this fellowship of believers. And it just grows and it grows. And if we do what God tells us to do, guess what? It'll grow daily. Those who are being saved. Now I'm going to tell you, the power of the gospel hasn't changed one iota since the day it was given to us. It still brings the dead to life. It takes them from the kingdom of darkness and transfers them to the kingdom of light. There is nothing that's changed in the gospel message whatsoever. Not 1 ounce of power has stopped being involved in the gospel message. The problem is those who claim to know Jesus Christ aren't sharing it like the first church did. We're not taking it out every time we go. We're not looking for people everywhere we go. We're just not doing it. You know, even on vacation, we were there, and I was sharing the gospel and trying to reach out to people, and I was a little bit embarrassed because I didn't take any tracts with me. I had my business cards. I didn't take any tracts. I was looking at that. I said, how could I leave and not bring any tracts with me? So I had business cards, and I was going and talking to people about it. I said, please go to our website and do all this. And there was a couple. There were like 3 rooms down. There's a hallway. There's 2 rooms and a hallway in them. They were there. We were there. They were there. When we got there that evening, we were sitting outside, smoking cigarettes, drinking beer. Ham's beer. I just remember, I haven't seen that in years. So it's a kind of a northern thing. And he's out there drinking. Next morning, as soon as I got up, he was out there drinking. Tuesday morning, and I stopped and talked to him a little bit and tried to start a conversation with him, and he didn't talk much at all. I mean, he'd say, I was like, hey, where are you from? Minnesota. Oh, it must be cold up there. Yep. Real cold. Mm-hmm. Like, okay, so anyway, I stopped and tried to start a conversation with him, and he didn't. You know, you asked some prodding questions. He never did give an open door for that. I was praying, Lord, I'd sure like to talk to them. And then Tuesday morning, I get up, and Christy's still getting ready. I go out. It's like 7:15 in the morning. And I walk outside, and there's 2 empty beer cans there already. At 7:15. My goodness. Do you think he has any hope? Every time I walk by, you know, they were smoking. I said, they must go through 3 packs of cigarettes a day apiece. Every time I see them, they were smoking and drinking beer. Even before breakfast, he was drinking. I said, Lord, if I could just